All right, well, we've got a little bit to wrap up here with monopoly and monopolistic competition. We're actually done with monopoly, but the concepts are similar for monopolistic competition. And we left off last time talking about the key difference for monopolistic competition. And what was it? What was really the key thing we're honing in on in terms of the characteristics? What was it? Differentiated product, right. So the products that are being sold are slightly different from each other. So they're not different products, but they're differentiated products. And that turns out to play an important role. So I told you the historical example of Old MacDonald had a farm, and how we got the first McDonald's, and then kind of how that market grew and evolved over time. So what I want to start you off with today is the long run graph for monopolistic competition. All right, so we've got quantity on the horizontal axis. We're measuring dollars here. Let's start off with the demand curve. What do we think it'll look like if we have lots of substitutes? When we start talking fast food hamburgers or shampoo or anything, more elastic, right? So is that steeper or flatter? Flatter. So what I want to do is draw a demand curve that's kind of flat, not totally flat. You know, you don't have to be perfect with it, but enough to be able to see that you purposely put some relative flatness to it. Now, what's that trick that we do with the marginal revenue curve? To draw it? The midpoint. So with this, it's kind of weird because it's flat, but you can kind of visualize, you know, maybe this going down to here off your paper, approximate midpoint, or you just start in the corner and you kind of go, something like that. So it's supposed to be twice as steep. So in terms of its slope, we did this in the monopoly chapter, that the marginal revenue curve is twice the slope of the demand curve and lies below it. And the reason it has that is because in order for the firm to sell more product, it has to lower its price. But it can't just lower its price for the extra good, it has to lower it for all of the goods. And that's what gives us this extra revenue that's less than maybe the price that we're selling it for. So that can be confusing because we look at this and we say, wow, if I'm selling 100 hamburgers here, why is it that I'm selling 100 hamburgers at this price, but I'm only bringing in this much revenue on the 100th burger? The reason is, in order to sell the 100th burger, I had to lower my price, not only for the 100th burger, but for all the previous 99 that I was selling to, right? So that was what we called the single price monopoly. That's kind of carrying forward here into monopolistic competition, giving us our baseline case of a marginal revenue curve that looks like this for a single price monopolistically competitive firm. Can these firms engage in price discrimination? You bet. Yep, they do, right? We got Burger King coupons, we got Burger King deals, student discounts. So they also can engage in price discrimination. Price discrimination is charging different prices to different people for the same good. And it's completely legal as long as we don't violate one of the protected classes in the United States. That we can charge different prices to different people. All right. With this, no firm, I would argue, can escape the law of diminishing marginal product. And so I'm going to draw the marginal cost curve cutting through that point I made, not for any particular reason. And if we start thinking about some possibilities for production here, we got maybe this at 85. Which quantity should the firm produce? 85. Why? The last unit produced costs matches the revenue generated by it. Holy grail of business, all that stuff. As long as price is greater than what? Average variable costs, not total costs, but variable costs. As long as price is greater than average variable cost, then we should follow the produce the quantity where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost business, right? Why is that with the price greater than average variable cost? What's the logic there? We can memorize that, but I think it's better for your intuition if you really buy into that concept. So why would we want to shut down if the price is less than the average variable cost? You can't cover the variable cost. And students tend to get hung up on saying you can't cover the fixed cost. That's not actually what we're trying to fix. That's not what we're trying to cover. We need to cover our variable cost. Now this makes a little more sense if we put it in context with the restaurant. If I have workers and I have variable costs, but especially labor, if my labor bill, let's go back to something even a lot simpler. If I'm a bar, one of those little hole-in-the-wall bars in kind of these small towns in Kansas, right? I'm a bar owner, and my labor is one bartender. When is it profitable for me to close down? Talk to me about that business. When you can't afford to pay him or her who's tending bar. So if they put in an 8-hour shift, and we're paying them $10 an hour because it's a one-man show. We might be kind of giving them a little management duties or whatever. So we're paying them $10 an hour, plus they get tips. So they got a pretty good job going. But if they put in a 10-hour shift, 8-hour shift at $10 an hour, I'm going to shell out $80. If my average cost per drink runs $4, how many drinks do I need to sell to justify having that person there on a Sunday or a Monday or whatever? 20. I have to sell 20 drinks that day. And if on average each person has 2 drinks, how many people do I need to have come into the bar on a Monday for me to justify it? 10. So now you see how this is kind of coming together of, does it make sense to operate or not? I got to have enough volume of business to cover my variable cost, not my rent, not my utility bill, not my attorney's bills, not all my fixed costs, but I need to cover my variable cost. And so, if price, and in the context that I gave you there, you can kind of think of, well, we got all kinds of drinks. We got beer, we got liquor, we got wine coolers, we got wine, we got all kinds of stuff. When I use this price variable, we're kind of looking at the average price as far as getting the intuition of it, right? So if my average drink price covers my average variable cost, then I should operate. I'm covering my variable cost. I'm covering that one person, that $80 to put in the shift. As long as price is greater than average variable cost, produce the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit produced is equal to the cost of the last unit. Okay, so there it is. There is the profit maximizing quantity of 85. What was our prediction in the long run for a monopolistically competitive firm? We kind of told the old McDonald opened up the first McDonald's, then the king from Europe came over and opened the first Burger King because he thought, if a farmer can do it, I can do it. And then John Hardy, the race car driver, he opened up one on the corner. Profit will be zero, right? We start to get that impression that if there's competition, people are going to compete away any economic profits. How do economic profits distinguish themselves from normal profits? They include opportunity costs. Good. So when we think about economic profits, you can kind of think of abnormally large profits. Profits that are saying, enter me, come and get the easy money. You can cover your opportunity cost and then some, right? You got this bonus amount of money, and then you're going to have the competition. Competition's going to drive the price down such that our prediction would be that profits are equal to zero. So I've been saving that because what curve do we need up here to illustrate profits, to calculate total profits? What's the missing link here? Average total cost. Good. And so we know that we're going to produce this quantity, and so we're going to kind of backdoor the way this graph looks like. At 85, I want you to go up to the demand curve because we know that that is going to be the price I'm going to charge for my drinks at the bar on average. And in the long run, that average price is going to be equal to the average total cost. And so the average total cost curve looks like this. It comes down, watch me draw this, it kisses that point, and then it bottoms out at marginal cost just like it always does with the fat dot, and then it turns up, average total cost. So now we got 2 points here that's just kissing the demand curve at the profit maximizing point, and then it still bottoms out where it intersects the marginal cost curve. Why did I know that it's drawn that way? Because at 85, the price equals the average total cost, which lets me know that profits are zero because that equation, that times 85 equals zero. Remember that this is the long run. What is the key characteristic? I'm going to write this one out so you guys have this. What is the characteristic of monopolistic competition that predicts? I don't know if it predicts, that's probably not the best language, but we'll roll with it. What is the characteristic that leads us to the prediction of economic profits equal to zero in the long run? What is it, Todd? Free entry and exit. Right. That's that competition factor. So free entry and exit. What are the other two? What is it? Many sellers. So we have many sellers selling that differentiated product. Those are the assumptions of our model for monopolistic competition. Okay, questions there? Allocatively efficient? Allocative efficiency in monopolistic competition? So is Q star allocatively efficient? No. How do you know that? What do we need to know? Yes, it's not where marginal cost intersects the demand curve. That's not the pure definition, but you're saying the right thing. What is the demand curve? The marginal benefit curve. So as far as what you're kind of remembering from that is that allocative efficiency occurs for society when the quantity that's being observed in the marketplace is at the point where the cost of the last unit equals the benefit of the last unit. That is happening at this 100. So is that allocatively efficient? No. Q star is less than what is allocatively efficient. So firms in a monopolistically competitive environment are underproducing relative to the optimal quantity. Is it productively efficient? No. Is Q star productively efficient? I hear a no. What's our criteria for productive efficiency? Yes, and why? What is happening at that intersection? So that's the correct interpretation looking at the graph, but there was a little bit more detail.
Minimum.
It's at the minimum of the average total cost curve. So conceptually, again, if we look at this picture, is the firm currently producing their product at the absolute lowest average total cost? No. This is the lowest cost per unit given their resources. So if this is 120, again, just kind of making up some numbers here to motivate things, that is the productively efficient quantity. So do we have productive efficiency? No. The market quantity is less than what is productively efficient. So you should have this in your notes from when we did Monopoly, but let me be careful here. So allocative efficiency, you should kind of burn into your memories, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. And for productive efficiency, we need to be at the minimum of the average total cost curve. And we're not getting that here. So sometimes we refer to this as excess capacity. The firm has kind of some excess capacity. If it did a little more volume, it could actually lower cost as it would increase quantity. So the firm is sitting with some excess capacity, which economists would call kind of some waste. So if we did a little deadweight loss analysis, similar to what we did with the Monopoly, we'd have this little triangle here. So we're currently producing at 85. Allocative efficiencies here, that's what determines, by the way, the dead weight loss. And so we have this little bit of waste. So how could we get rid of that? The economist is always thinking, well, that's not good. Maybe we can figure something better out to get rid of waste. What would need to be done? How? The flip side of it, from what you know about Burger King, McDonald's, and other places, what is kind of wasteful in a sense in your mind that would be leading to this conclusion here? Extra food, okay? Some food goes to waste in the restaurant business. That's a possibility. What else sometimes seems like a waste that if you go down your list of the things we brainstormed of how they're different, which one of those from society's perspective might appear to be kind of wasteful? What was on that list again? What do we have? What's that? Yeah.
There's style, advertising, service, recipes, name or logo, branding, quality, atmosphere, promotions, location, convenience, quantity, and price.
All right. So, Sarah, can I actually borrow your sheet? Because I want to talk a little bit more about some of those too. But let's start off with my question. Which one of these? So how do firms differentiate? So let me zoom in here. Ooh, very nice. I like your picture up there. That's good. Okay. So style, advertising, service, recipes, name, logo, branding, quality, atmosphere, locations, healthiness, quantity, price. Of that list, what maybe seems a little like wasteful from society's standpoint? Advertising, yeah, good. Who said that? That's worth an extra credit point, I think. So advertising, I think, is the one thing that we kind of look at and we say, gosh, is it really worth it to spend $2 million for a 30-second ad during the Super Bowl? Is that really society's, best spot to put $2 million on a 30-second commercial, What's your response to somebody who says something like that? Check out Beyonce's latest album. What do you mean?
You didn't know advertising.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that was her thing, right? She just kind of put it out there. Didn't even say a word, right? I mean, nobody knew she was even putting anything out. I heard Prince put something out yesterday too. I don't know if he advertised it or not, but that was on the radio. Apparently Prince, I'm a Prince fan, okay? I grew up in the 80s. I graduated in 1989. Purple Rain, awesome. Best, one of the best, my favorite albums. So, heck of a performer, blah, blah, blah. But apparently he was catching some heat that he was kind of washed up. I think he's like 56 years old now. And so he put out 2 new albums, like at the same time. So he kind of did something weird too. Like I think he put 2 apparently out. Does anybody know this story? That's about all I know. I think I caught the gist of it, but I haven't heard all of it. I haven't purchased it yet. I think I might. I might be a buyer. All right, so advertising. So is it wasteful? I mean, do we like it? Do we lament it? Do we... What's that? What's the purpose of the advertising? What's the main purpose of the advertising? To get that buyer in, right? So you're in a competitive, what's that? Attention, to grab attention to your product. Okay? To increase the quantity demanded. Yeah, we can maybe alter the demand curve. One of our things was taste and preferences, right? That kind of shifts the demand curve. And so through advertising, we might be able to educate, mold, manipulate I don't know, there's probably different words, but educate would be one of them. I mean, when you come up with a new product, a new thing, you need to educate the public on how useful that is. So parts of advertising seem okay, parts of it might seem wasteful. So what is the solution if that is wasteful? If that's part of the waste, could we put government regulation in place that didn't allow them to advertise? That almost seems anti-American, doesn't it?
They do it.
Has that ever been done?
Tobacco.
Yeah. Tobacco and booze. They relaxed this regulation, but for the longest period of time, hard liquor could not be advertised on television. So they took away that mechanism. So in other places, I think in Australia, you can't advertise cigarettes at all. You can't put them on billboards, you can't put them in magazines, you can't do any sort of advertising. So in some ways, we might think that, well, that might help eliminate some waste of dollars, but we still got to educate people and figure out how to get our products sold, and we'll probably find other ways if it's just regulated. So, other thoughts there? Thoughts come to mind?
You change the media of your advertising.
Yeah, you change the media of your what type of advertising you're doing. So you can't have a popular one that's restricted is not having signs in yards, like people do it sometimes. In some places you can. So what is Little Caesar's response to that? What is the haircut place? What is the mattress place up in Lawrence and some other places? What is their response to the regulation that you can't place a sign in a yard that's fixed and just stationary? They have somebody holding it. They can't restrict somebody walking around with a sign. So those people that are holding up signs and waving you in, that is partially at least a response to that type of regulation. They can hold a sign, but you can't plant the sign. All right, so how else could we, if we eliminated advertising, that might not really serve its purpose, that we're not educating. I think part of the thing with cigarettes or booze is that those are the evil things, and so it's okay to put the kibosh on advertising. But if we think about goods and services that are benefiting us, then that doesn't sound like a good idea. What if we eliminated differentiation? Would that work? Exactly. We'd be right back to perfect competition. If we eliminated differentiation, that's the only thing that differed from perfect competition, right? And so if the product becomes undifferentiated, what happens to this demand curve? It goes perfectly elastic, just like it did with our perfect competition. Do we get productive efficiency if we flatten this thing out? Yeah. Now, as we flatten it a little bit more, does Q star move to the right or to the left? As we flatten it to the right, because the marginal revenue curve is tracking up with it. This is where I need the two golf clubs, I guess. But we got, as we flatten this thing, the marginal revenue curve's coming this way. And as we totally flatten it, marginal revenue equals it, and we get the result of perfect competition. So some people argue, and rightfully so, that the one thing we get from monopolistic competition is variety. And if we have people that are not identical to each other, if we don't have identical preferences, then we're actually meeting different people's needs through variety of products. And so that's kind of the trade-off that economists point to. As long as we have many sellers and lots of competition, if demand gets more elastic, then this difference becomes maybe very small and kind of negligible, right? If we have a lot of good substitutes available, this starts to flatten, and those two start to get closer together. All right, questions or comments there? I wanted to talk about a couple of these is why I wanted to leave this up here. Especially price. How does price fit in? Is it really price that they're competing on? Is it really price that they're competing on?
No.
Why?
It doesn't benefit them. They're not going to compete to lower a price. They're going to compete to maximize profit.
Okay. And so where does that price come from? The quality, kind of all these other attributes, right? So I wanted to just kind of call that to your attention that when we think about competing on price, we're really competing on probably these other things in some capacity. If we've lowered the amount of money we're spending on branding or something, maybe we can lower our price, right, and be more competitive. But it's really because we've maybe made some other changes and responded to the marketplace. And so this monopolistically competitive firm is a price maker still. They are choosing their price according to their perceived demand for their product and how it fits in with all the other competitors. And that's what this picture is giving us, is their price setting. Okay, comments or questions on that? I'm trying to keep past that X here. All right, so I wanted to add those notes. So, note. There is a dead weight loss with monopolistic competition. However, the dead weight loss shrinks as the demand curve gets more elastic. We'll put in parentheses here, lots of competition. Most people argue, most agree that variety of products is a benefit that outweighs the cost. Or waste, I should say, maybe. This is kind of, I guess, the last bullet here. Flatter demand goes with flatter marginal revenue, causing an increase in Q star. Getting closer to QAE and QPE. So, note number 2, I'm just kind of wanting to get these down in your notes, some of the things we talked about. These firms can price discriminate, which was covered in the previous chapter with monopoly. So note number 2, monopolistically competitive firms can price discriminate. Due to market power from their differentiated product. So the monopolistically competitive firm can price discriminate. And they do it all the time. All right. How much questions there? Let's see. I had, what did I do with that? Darn it. I think I left it on my computer. I'll try to remind me. I'm going to put it on my thumb drive. I got some data on pot that I thought you guys might find interesting. One of my MBA students did their midterm paper on the marijuana stuff that we talked about before, and I saw some data that I hadn't seen with expected tax revenue and the costs associated with it. So it's kind of the stuff we talked about in generalities. We actually have some information on. So I'll try to remember to bring that. Okay, so we've got one more market structure to fill in the gaps, and that is our oligopoly. Oligopoly. Kind of a fun word to say. Might take you a few times with some practice. Oligopoly. So on our spectrum of competition, this is the one that fell a little closer to monopoly. So we got the monop, we got the perfect competition, both of which are usually very unlikely. Where did I see this information? I was grading these papers. I watched the Royals game. So yay, go Royals. I'm a complete fair weather fan, so with full disclosure, I started in the 6th inning last night, and that was the first Royals game I watched all year. So I'm a total fair weather fan, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm all Royals. I grew up in Minnesota and live in Iowa, so this is my first time been down to Kansas City. I have been to the stadium a couple times, if that counts. But they had a pretty exciting game, and that didn't wrap up till midnight. And then I still had papers to grade, so I'm kind of going to be dragging tail here a little bit today. So we've got these two ends of the spectrum. We just wrapped up monopolistic competition by having the differentiated product. And now we're going to look at oligopoly. Oligopoly is kind of a hybrid of, I guess, these two in a sense. Because we've got a few firms instead of many firms and many firms, so we got many, many. So this one had many, many, few, and one. We start kind of keeping tabs here. And we had identical products or a homogeneous products. We had differentiated products. We're going to have homogeneous or differentiated. Turns out they can go both ways here with oligopoly. And then we had a homogeneous product for monopoly because they were the only show in town. Free entry and exit. Free entry and exit. Barriers to entry. And barriers to entry. So we kind of put in more of these details before, so this is why I'm kind of just doing a little shorthand, but it's kind of nice to keep all of these in perspective. And why did we spend 4 chapters on this? Because this is the types of things that companies need to be thinking about if they're branching out into a new division, if a small business is opening up a pizza shop on Main Street here in Ottawa. I mean, you got to be thinking about what type of environment am I going to be operating in, because that changes the decision-making process. We've got the whole Holy Grail business, which is now going to be a little different as we explore oligopoly with only having a few firms with barriers to entry. All right, so this seems like as good a time as any to get kinky. Let's get kinked. Maybe not so kinky, but this is the autonomous version of getting kinky. This is a model called the kink demand curve. The kink demand curve. So, kinked demand curve. So with oligopoly, we've just got a few companies. And these few companies are going to act strategically with each other now, because one person's profits is not all under their control. It's dependent upon what another firm does. And so it's the interaction of both of those two that determines how much money they make or how well they do. And that's different than what we had over here. It was a number of competitors that might have drove the demand curve to change here, but now we've just got the behavior of a few people that we can gauge. We can kind of look after and think about things strategically. So the key to oligopoly is we have a few firms acting strategically because one firm's profits depend on the other's actions. So here's our new strategic behavior assumption. Here's our new assumption of the kink demand model anyway. So the kink demand model is just one model. We're going to spend a lot of time on some other stuff. With kink demand, our assumption is this. If one firm raises price, the other firms will what? So imagine we've got a few firms. Maybe the U.S. auto industry is a good one to think about. We've got Ford, GM, and Chrysler for the most part. If one firm raises their price of their four-door sedan, maybe it's the Ford Taurus or something, if one firm raises their price, what are the other firms likely to do? Are they going to follow suit and raise their price or not, do you think? Follow the leader? What do you think? If they stayed the same, what would be the incentive of doing that?
Then they would come with their firm rather than the firm that raised it.
Okay, so if we have, let's start to think about the dynamics here. If we have 3 firms, and each one of these firms has some market share, so maybe one firm has 40% market share, and another firm has 30, and another firm has 30. Not the best pie graph in the world, I don't think that's all 30. But at least my math is right? We got 60 plus 40 is 100%. So we got Ford, GM, and Chrysler. If, as Raj was saying, if those guys make up the market and one firm raises their price and they have pretty good substitutes, the products are differentiated, right? The four-door sedan, the Taurus versus the Chevy, whatever, Cobalt. That's probably the lower end model compared to the Taurus, but they've got some sort of alternative of the four-door sedan, right? And then Chrysler's got their, you guys gotta help me out with some of these cars here. They're 3M, yeah, maybe they're four-door. We got the 3M versus the Taurus, and so we got some options. If they raise their price, Raj is saying they're gonna run to the competitors, right? And then what happens to that market share? It shifts, yeah. So if, let's say Ford was the big player here with 40%, they raise their price, people run to the other two. If they keep it the same, then they're going to increase their market share. So that's going to be kind of a good thing. All right, so that's the behavior we're going to assume. If one firm raises their price, the other firms will not raise. And if one firm lowers price, the other firms will, what are they going to do? Are they going to keep pat, increase, or decrease? Yeah, if they want to maintain their market share, again, assuming these cars are pretty good substitutes, one car lowers their price relative to the other two, then all the buyers, start to go towards that company. And so these competitors are forced to lower their price. So if one firm lowers, the other firms will also lower price. If one firm what?
If one firm raises their price,
yeah,
any of the other firms further lower their price. I mean, they've already lowered the best one raise.
Yeah, that not for this model anyway. So we're not going to read. So right now we're just building up this model, the economic model, which is going to have these assumptions, which might be rigid, and then we can play games with that once we kind of draw conclusions from this. So if you want to add something here, if one firm lowers the price, the other firms will also lower. You can start to think in terms of market share. So to maintain market share. And if one firm raises their price, the other firms will not raise. Why? To gain market share. All right, so there's our assumptions. Let's turn to a graph and think about these implications. So I'm going to draw two demand curves. One of these curves is the demand for the Ford. The other curve is the demand for U.S. autos. Which is which? The Ford's the steeper one? Elastic one?
Ford's the more elastic one.
The Ford's the more elastic one. Why do you say that? I heard a couple elastics.
Because there's like I said, there's the other substitutes.
There's more substitutes. Good. You guys kind of remember maybe that Jack Daniels lesson that we had, right? Where if we look at how many substitutes there are for whiskey versus how many substitutes there are for Jack Daniels, the more narrowly we define the good, the more substitutes there are. The more substitutes there are, the more elastic the demand curve is. So on this graph, this might be the demand for a Ford, and this might be the demand for U.S. autos in general. We'd expect the Ford now has substitutes of the Chrysler and the GM. U.S. autos don't have as many substitutes. Okay? So, everything in economics seems to happen where the two lines cross. So let's just start at that point. So maybe this, what's a Ford Taurus running nowadays? It's got to be 20-some thousand, 25,000 or 28? I guess it depends on a lot of factors, but I'll go, let's say 28,000. And so we've got the 3M, or we got the Chrysler and the other alternatives. They're probably running about 28,000 as well, right? So if Ford raises their price, which demand curve do they follow? This one or this one? If they raise their price, which demand curve do they follow? This one or this one? The U.S. auto. So according to these assumptions, everybody agree with that? The U.S. auto, I hear a no.
You said if Ford raises their prices, which line do they follow?
Yeah, which line do they follow? If Ford raises their price, are they going to follow the Ford line or the U.S. auto? Remember, we've got this behavior going on that some prices might be changing, others prices might be not.
They don't follow the Ford line because the rest of the competition is not going to raise the price.
Okay, and was that part of what we did with the law of demand? What was that answer for your test question at the bottom of the page? Increase in price leads to a decrease in quantity demanded, which means a movement along ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus like what? All other prices of substitutes and complements that might go along with it, right? So that is this demand curve. And a movement along it means we've held constant. Following what this says here, that would make sense. What about if Ford lowers their price? If Ford lowers their price, are we going to follow this demand curve or this demand curve? All the U.S. autos kind of lower their price together. So now we got multiple moving parts. And so Ford's got to be careful because the executives might be thinking that, oh, well, we'll just lower price and we'll get a lot of business. But in this environment, if the others lower the price at the same time, the demand curve is going to be less elastic with the other firms dropping their price too. So if we raise the price, we follow this demand curve for the Ford. If we lower the price, we follow this demand curve. And through the magic of special effects, voila! A kinked demand curve. Waiting for an ovation here. We got the kink demand curve. Come on. Give me some. It's really the demand curve for the Ford, yes. So I wanted to motivate that. So it's really not the demand for U.S. autos. The kink demand curve, since you guys wrote it on your papers, you might just put an X through the auto. This is the relevant demand curve for the Ford. The actual demand curve for the Ford looks like this when we're in an environment where this is the behavior going on. For price decreases, my demand curve is less elastic, more inelastic, if you will. And for price increases, I have a more elastic demand, and it's kinked at the price where I'm at. So, what does the marginal revenue curve look like with a kinked demand curve? Okay, it's going to do a little weird stuff itself. So, I'm hopefully training you to go start at this end and kind of work your eyeball this way. So where does the marginal revenue curve start? Same as where it always has, yep. So we got this demand curve is the relevant section of the demand, right? Yeah, so it's going to be half the first slope. So it's going to start going like this, and then what's it going to do? How far do we bring this? When does it start to get weird on us? At this quantity, right? So everything's driven by the quantity, remember, because that is our choice variable here. So if this is at 100 cars, then up to 100 cars, the marginal revenue curve looks like this. And then what's the marginal revenue here when it gets weird? Half of that curve. So we do that old eyeball trick. Half the spot. This curve would be coming down like this. And then it would come down somewhere down here. I didn't mean to make this so dramatic. Maybe your paper will work out a little bit different. And the marginal revenue looks like this. Here's where it gets weird, is this weird space in between. The marginal revenue curve kind of effectively does that because it's discontinuous. We got this chunk over here, and then we've got this chunk over here, all being mapped according to how you drew your kinks. Yes, it's weird. Now, one of our predictions that we have is that prices tend to be sticky in oligopolies under these conditions, I should say, for this kink demand curve. One of the predictions we make is that prices tend to be sticky. Does Ford have incentive to increase the price of their car? Does Ford have much incentive to increase the price of their car? No. Do they have much incentive to decrease the price of their car? Not really, right? So because of this strategic behavior, prices tend to be sticky. And where they're sticking is at the kink. That is kind of further supported if we think about the optimal decision with multiple marginal cost curves. Let me just put 3 of them up here. If that's our marginal cost curve, and that's our marginal revenue curve, what is the optimal quantity if marginal cost is MC1? Using my numbers. What is the profit maximizing quantity? 100. What about if costs fall to MC2? 100, 100, 100. We've got this big flat spot. So there's not much incentive for them to change. Even if costs change with this kink business going on, prices tend to be sticky. All right, so result or conclusion. With kink demand, prices tend to be sticky, i.e. no incentive to change. They might kind of change slowly, but we don't see big price changes coming out frequently. Okay, questions on kink demand. This wasn't the best drawing ever. Hopefully, I don't know if yours. Any questions on the graph? If you didn't quite get something, let me know.
You picked the marginal revenue back up.
Yeah.
Where was that?
That was taking this portion of the demand curve and kind of drawing an imaginary line up to here. This demand curve's coming down, cuts through the midsection halfway. So just kind of visualizing it, and then it pops into existence down there. Anything else? Well, economists' general consensus on the kink demand model is that it sucks. So, general consensus, is that right? Is that the kinked demand model sucks. As far as economic models go. It's fun, it's kind of sexy because we get to talk about being kinky and that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to an economic model, it kind of sucks because there's a lot, it almost raises more questions than brings about answers for us. How did I determine the 28,000? I just said, whatever it is, then that's where these two lines cross, and that didn't really tell a story of where that price came from, right? So if we ask ourselves, why? Why does it suck? Well, where does the price come from? The model has no answer for that. This model has no answer. We just kind of assume it. Somehow it appeared somehow, and we're at 28,000. And then we tell kind of a decent little story about some behavior and how prices might be sticky. But it doesn't do much for capturing some strategic behavior that could be going on with these companies. So the more modern way to model oligopoly is with game theory. So game theory is a class that's being taught here for the first time ever, I think, as far as I know, by Dr. McCright. He's got some math students over there teaching some game theory. I think he kind of asked them if they wanted to have a class that was in some different topics, and I think it was Sawyer, maybe it was somebody else. Sawyer had this class last year, and we did some game theory in class, and she's a math major and wanted to explore that a little bit more. So they're going into game theory. They got a textbook this thick of jumping into some of the topics we're going to cover in this section with oligopoly. So the response back to this, kind of the modern way to model strategic behavior in oligopoly. The modern way to model strategic behavior in oligopoly is with game theory. Now, to me, that name kind of sucks because it sounds like we're going to break out the Monopoly board and have a serious game of backgammon or, play cards and we're just playing little board games that we did when we were kids is when game theory comes to mind, or maybe it's video game theory or something like that. And in reality, this model is very powerful and very insightful and very useful in its applications, and it's very wide-reaching. So my name that I've been trying to have the academic community change to, which I've been striking out, is the theory of strategic behavior. Doesn't that have a nice, bigger, formal, big, fancy term that sounds just like we're getting into something serious here, right? Instead of Monopoly and Parcheesi up here. So, the theory of strategic behavior. And so what we do with game theory is we develop a model that shows moves and counter moves, kind of the thinking that players do when they act strategically. So the theory of strategic behavior, or game theory, models behavior / choices through moves and counter moves of players, which we will more generically call agents. Secret agent man, secret. All right, so we might have people, we might have businesses, we might have government, we might have foreign governments, we can have all kinds of stuff. So our generic word would be agents. An economic agent is kind of the generic nerdy econ word that we put on there. So we're going to model behavior or choices through moves and counter moves of players by the payoffs associated with their choices. So this stuff started back during the Cold War, to give you an example of some of the places where it's been used. You guys know what the Cold War is?
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of doing it a little bit now even, but what's the Cold War? What's going on during the Cold War? A bunch of bluffing, yeah. It's through what? What was kind of the bluffs? The rise of nuclear weapons by who, especially during the 50s and 60s? Russia versus USA, the big battle, right? So there's our two players or agents. And the cost is world destruction, right? So each one made choices on building up and potentially bluffing how much they had, where they're located, in terms of the buildup of weapons, enough to annihilate the planet. And we can think about why they chose the things they did through this game theory setup. Because neither party really wanted to annihilate the Earth. That would end up harming both of us, right? So here we got the buildup of weapons. How can we alter the outcomes so that we have world peace at the end is our outcome that we might enjoy, which I think we're still working on that one. Last time I checked, we don't have so much of that going around the world right now. All right, so yes, we'll pick up there next time, which will be after your fall break.